requisition form. So material requisition forms completed for job A143. So the requisition is that the requisition, it means you requested the department this one, this receipt number that you gave them 12 feet long, 2 by 4S, and 1 by 6 at 12 feet long. The unit of the numbers are shown here. So these are just like the dimensions of that number, and these are the quantity. You need 12, 20, right? So per unit cost of 2 by 4, 12 feet, cost is 3, so total cost would be 36. So 1 by 6, 12 feet, you need 20 quantity, one piece is $4, so quantity will be 80. Easily calculated, right? So it means from the warehouse or your stock where you save your lumber over there, material over there. So this is authorized by your signature party over there, and they issue to you. So your total material cost 116. So this 116 is going to be put on job cost sheet here, right? So in that direct material, so this is the 116, and this is the requisition number, and that requisition number is backed by the requisition form for material. So this is just how the bookkeeping is just going on, so that you have all the documentation is complete. That's it. Direct labor, similarly, where it came from direct labor form, which is called employee time ticketing. So if you happen to have internship or go through some kind of like factories, so over there, any department you are going, there's a punch card, you punch over there. So it means it started recording your time. Okay, this worker is coming to this facility at this time, and if you want to exit, you punch that card and you exit. So your that much hour that you spend on that facility, that would be your wages. So here we go. So workers use time tickets to record the amount of time that they spend on each job. So here is a time ticket for the employees who work 8 hours on a job. So they work 8 hours. And their salary rate is $11. And you must, remember that this is job A143. So that you cannot allocate others people working on different jobs. For specific discrete making job, which is you allocated a number A143, and this worker spent 8 hours. 8 hours multiplied by its 11 hourly rate, answer is 88, right? Supervisor signed it, and that goes to direct labor form over there, right? Easy? Okay, here comes a real challenge to find out manufacturing overhead. So now compute predetermined overhead rate. Now predetermined which means estimated or applied, means in advance you are applying the overhead rate, right? So recall our discussion from our previous lecture that cost is based on its cost drivers, right? We talked about the ratio analysis, numerator, denominator, right? It means per unit depends on, not only depends on numerator, but also depends on denominator, right? We talked about over there, okay? Because the nature of the per unit changes by the change in denominator, right? So let's talk about this stuff here. So why we are using allocation base? Why we are using this predetermining overhead rate? Like I gave you the example and gave you the introduction when we started this chapter, that when you receive the order, you gave some kind of a code. On that base, you first calculated your estimated or forecasting figures. So direct material and direct labor is easily traceable. You don't need to estimate that one, right? But for manufacturing overhead, because manufacturing overhead, you can only calculate when it actually happened. But in order to receive that order, you first forecast that and then divide it with some numbers. You find out per unit manufacturing overhead. And if somebody gave you the order for two crates, 3 crates, you multiply that one and gave the quotations, right? So similarly, why there is a need of allocation base? So manufacturing overhead is applied to the jobs that are in process. And allocation base, such as direct labor hours, direct labor dollars on machine hours, is issued to assign manufacturing overhead to individual jobs. Similarly, they are talking about that the numerator was divided by denominator. So it means the per unit that you want to find out. So the denominator is called the cost driver or allocation base. So it depends on companies' policies or companies, decisions or something, or companies' cost drivers, which drive the cost. So if major portion of manufacturing overhead is coming from labors, so naturally you would divide the manufacturing overhead with either labor hours or direct labor in dollar terms. If major portion of manufacturing overhead is coming from machines, the overhauling of machines, wear and tear of machine, maintenance of machines, then you divide it with machine hours. So basically you need to divide with that number which derive that cost, which makes sense, right? For example, if a hospital is using X-ray machines, right? If the X-ray machine costs $1 million and it can X-ray up to 10,000, so what should be the cost of one X-ray? $100. But what if, the X-ray machine depends on number of units. But if you divide this machine cost $1 million and you divide it with utility cost, in utility cost is, for example, $1,000. So it means this allocation of the cost is correct or not? It doesn't make sense. Why? Because electricity is not deriving this $1 million cost of X-ray machines. So that is the concept of allocation based and cost driver. One and the same thing, allocation based or cost driver, one and the same thing. We will be also learning in coming, slides or lectures as well. Also, we talked about in our earlier lecture. So it makes sense to divide with that number which basically makes sense of the numerator. So this is just, I'm just repeating the stuff over there. So why using the allocation base? Because it is impossible or difficult to trace overhead rate to a particular job. Manufacturing overhead consists of many different items ranging from grease used in machine to production manager's salary. So many types of manufacturing overhead are fixed, even though output fluctuates during the period. So this is just one of the same thing that we are just discussing here. So here we go. How we find out the estimated manufacturing overhead? So in job order costing, we call this predetermining overhead rate. The word predetermining. In some question, it is also called estimated. Come on. Okay. In some, examples over there, we also call this estimated overhead rate as well. If you want to find out estimated overhead rate, so remember, estimated total MOH divided by estimated total units that will divide. So it means you must compare apple to apple. So if you want to find out the estimated overhead rate, so both numerator and denominator must be estimated. Estimated cost divided by estimated units. In manufacturing overhead jargon, we call this denominator allocation base or cost driver, right? So this is just the language of managerial accounting. So don't just get confused with this word. So you understand how we and why we calculate the predetermining of overhead rate, right? Because we need to first find out the cost and then accept the order, whether this order is profitable for us or not, whether we should accept it or not, because we don't have the actual numbers. Actual numbers of what? The indirect material and indirect labor. And you add it, you find out manufacturing overhead. You don't have that number. So you estimate in advance. So once you did all the stuff, and then you compare your actual with the estimated. If they are equal, you made a good job, you made a planned job. So this is the planned profit, because planned profit is always good, right? Because it is stable and it helps you to decide on further goals as well. But if the estimation is actual is above or below the estimation, it means your plan is now disturbed. Even though the cost is below the estimation, that is also a risk. Even though the cost is above your estimation, even then that is a risk, right? That is, you need to cope that. It means your outcome is not what you expected, right? So this creates a problem. So everyone, are you getting my point? Sipade, David, Christine, Chandra?
Yep.
Yeah, no questions.
Okay. Okay, now why there is a need of PUHR? So using a predetermining overhead rate makes it possible to estimate total job cost sooner. Actual overhead for the period is not known until the end of the period, like I just told you. So there are basically three steps to in this to find out the predetermined overhead rates. Number one, you estimate the numerator, simply the total estimate cost of the period, divided by, you estimate the allocation base, the denominator, and then you find out predetermining overhead rate, right? Here we go. So let's talk about this. So Harris Fabrics computes its predetermining overhead rate. So question itself mentioned how they calculate the predetermining overhead rate. They determine overhead rate annually based on direct labor